Her grandfather's jazz club was being torn apart, piece by painful piece, her soul shattered with every violent blow to his cherished piano. She was just a singer, defenseless against the city's ruthless developers. But then a dark, silent figure emerged from the shadows, watching her humiliation. He wasn't a hero. He was Damon Volkov, an obsessed mafia boss who didn't save her club, he claimed it. And her. Now, trapped in his opulent, dangerous world, will his protection be her salvation or her ultimate prison? The air in the Sapphire Lounge always smelled of forgotten dreams and stale whiskey, a potent cocktail of nostalgia that both comforted and suffocated Alara Vance. Tonight, however, there was an added, unwelcome sharpness, the metallic tang of fear, clinging to the worn velvet seats and seeping into the very pores of the ancient wooden stage. Her fingers, usually so nimble and confident, trembled slightly as they danced across the yellowed ivory keys of the grand piano. It wasn't the cold November chill seeping through the cracked window panes that made her shiver, but the phantom touch of a future rapidly unraveling. Her voice, usually a smoky caress that could lull a troubled soul to peace, felt thin, fragile tonight. She poured every ounce of her dwindling energy into Misty, letting the mournful melody wash over the handful of patrons scattered like forgotten shadows in the dimly lit room. Each note was a silent prayer, a desperate plea for time, for a miracle, for anything to stop the inevitable. The Sapphire Lounge wasn't just a building. It was her grandfather's breath, his heartbeat, etched into every chipped brick and fading mural. He'd built it from nothing, brick by painful brick, a sanctuary for lost souls and soaring melodies. Now it was crumbling, and Alara, his sole heir and the last custodian of his legacy, felt like she was crumbling with it. A tremor ran through her, not from the piano's vibrations, but from the knot of dread tightening in her stomach. 2 days ago, another letter had arrived. Thicker than the previous ones, heavier, colder. The slick, expensive paper, sealed with a crest she had come to loathe, felt like a death warrant in her hands. Victor Thorne. The name itself was a viper's hiss in the quiet corners of her mind. He was a real estate titan, a wolf in bespoke suits, known for devouring historical landmarks and spitting out gleaming, soulless towers. The Sapphire Lounge was next on his menu. Alara finished her set, the final chord hanging in the air like a sigh. A few claps, polite and sparse, echoed in the cavernous room. She offered a tired smile, pushing a straight curl from her eyes. Every night was a performance, not just of music, but of resilience. She had to pretend, for the regulars who still believed in the magic of the sapphire, for the ghost of her grandfather who surely watched from the shadows. Another beautiful set, Alara. Mr. Henderson, a man whose silver hair matched the sheen of his polished cane, murmured from his usual booth. His eyes, kind and knowing, held a flicker of pity that Alara found harder to bear than outright anger. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," she replied, her voice huskier than she intended. She slid off the velvet-covered bench, the material clinging slightly to her simple black dress. The weight of the world seemed to settle on her shoulders as she navigated the empty tables, each one a monument to what once was. Backstage, in the tiny, cluttered room that served as her dressing room, office, and sometimes a makeshift bedroom, the stack of documents waited. They mocked her from the corner of the chipped vanity mirror. Eviction notices. Offers of purchase ridiculously low, insultingly generous, depending on Thorne's mood that week. Legal threats. She ran a hand over the rough, cold surface of the brick wall, feeling the texture of history beneath her fingers. This place was alive. It had seen joy, heartbreak, triumph, and despair. How could someone simply demolish it? She picked up the latest letter, the one with Thorne's personal seal. Her gaze traced the elegant, intimidating script. Final offer. Unavoidable action. October 31st. Today was October 29th. 2 days. 2 days until he could legally begin tearing down her life. A wave of nausea washed over her. She crumpled the letter in her fist, the expensive paper crinkling with a satisfying, albeit futile, protest. What do? What else can I do? The question screamed in her head, a discordant note in the symphony of her despair. She had tried everything, called every lawyer she could afford, and many she couldn't, contacted every historical society, every local newspaper. They offered sympathy, commiseration, but no solutions. Thorne's tentacles reached too far, too deep. His money, his connections, his sheer ruthlessness were a suffocating blanket over the city. She closed her eyes, picturing her grandfather's face, etched with a lifetime of melodies and hard-won wisdom. He had been a fighter, a true artist, fearless and unyielding. Would he be ashamed of her? Of how easily she was being swallowed by the darkness? A tear escaped, tracing a cold path down her cheek. No, he wouldn't. He taught her to fight too. But her weapons were a piano and a voice, not legal loopholes or brute force. The loneliness was a physical ache, a dull throb behind her ribs. There was no one to share this burden with. No family left, no true friends who understood the depth of her attachment to this decaying building. Just the echoes of her own desperate hope, growing fainter with each passing day. She was a solitary warrior, fighting a battle already lost, armed only with a fading melody and a fierce, unyielding spirit. But even the fiercest spirits could break under enough pressure. She felt the hairline cracks forming, threatening to shatter her into a million pieces. A sudden aggressive knock at the back door made her jump, a sharp, jarring sound that sliced through her melancholy. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Too loud for a delivery. Too late for a patron. It could only be one thing. Or rather, one type of thing. Thorne's goons had been making increasingly frequent visits. Her breath hitched. She shouldn't open it. She knew she shouldn't. But fear, cold and insidious, held her rooted to the spot. The knocking came again, louder this time, more insistent. A shiver ran down her spine, a premonition of something dark and dangerous looming just beyond the flimsy barrier of the door. Whatever it was, the storm was finally breaking. And she was utterly, devastatingly alone. The relentless drumming of rain against the Sapphire Lounge's skylight matched the frantic beat of Alara's heart. Outside, the city wept, mirroring the tears she refused to shed. Tonight, she chose Autumn Leaves, its familiar, melancholic chords a somber comfort. Her voice a rich, velvety alto, wrapped around the lyrics, each word imbued with the weight of her despair. The few patrons, huddled deeper into their booths, seemed to understand, finding solace in the shared melancholy. The aroma of damp asphalt and old wood hung heavy in the air, punctuated by the clinking of ice in lonely glasses. She closed her eyes, letting the music consume her, allowing the notes to carry away the crushing burden of Thorne's latest threat. 2 days. That was all she had left. A dull ache throbbed behind her eyes, the culmination of sleepless nights spent poring over legal documents she barely understood, and days battling a silent, invisible enemy. The piano, her grandfather's prized possession, felt like an extension of her soul. Its polished black surface, worn smooth by decades of loving hands, reflected the flickering candlelight, making the small stage glow with a defiant warmth. As she played, she could almost feel his presence beside her, a gentle hand guiding her through the intricate melodies. The song swelled, then faded into a lingering, delicate harmony. The last note hung suspended, a fragile bubble of beauty in the oppressive atmosphere. Just as the silence began to settle, a jarring cacophony erupted from the front door. The heavy oak groaned open, revealing 3 hulking figures silhouetted against the stormy night. Rain slicked their expensive trench coats, glistening like dark armor. They were not patrons. They were predators. A collective gasp rippled through the meager crowd. Mr. Henderson, usually so composed, visibly recoiled, clutching his cane tighter. Alara's fingers, still poised above the keys, froze. Her blood ran cold. This was it. The storm she had felt brewing for weeks was finally here, crashing down upon her. The tallest of the men, a brute with a shaved head and a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, strode forward, his heavy boots echoing ominously on the hardwood floor. His gaze swept over the room, chilling the air. He stopped at the edge of the stage, his eyes, flat and devoid of warmth, fixed on Alara. Alara Vance? His voice was a gravelly growl, amplified by the sudden, profound silence in the lounge. She swallowed, her throat dry. That's me. Her voice, though a whisper, held a thread of defiance she didn't know she possessed. He smirked, a cruel twist of his lips. Victor Thorne sends his regards. He also sends this. He produced a thick manila envelope from inside his coat, its contents visible through the semi-transparent paper, stacks of legal documents, undoubtedly the final, non-negotiable offer, or perhaps the order to vacate. Sign it. No. Or things get unpleasant. He tossed the envelope onto the piano lid with a contemptuous flick of his wrist. It landed with a soft thud. A brutal punctuation marked her performance. Her vision blurred, not from tears, but from the sudden, overwhelming surge of rage. How dare he? How dare they desecrate this sacred space? I won't sign, she stated, her voice stronger now. Fueled by a simmering fury, the brute chuckled, a harsh, grating sound. Foolish girl. Mr. Thorne isn't asking. He's telling. He gestured to his companions. Make her understand. Clearly. Before Alara could react, the other two men began their systematic destruction. One kicked over a table, sending glasses shattering against the floor, their crystalline shrapnel scattering like malicious stars. Another ripped down a framed photograph of her grandfather, the glass cracking with a sickening crunch. The few patrons, terrified, scrambled for the exits, their fear palpable, a suffocating wave that threatened to drown Alara. No. Stop it. Alara cried, leaping to her feet. Her heart pounded, a frantic drum against her ribs. She wanted to run, to protect, but she was trapped, frozen by a mixture of terror and desperate impotency. The scarred brute's eyes never left hers. His lips peeled back in another grotesque smirk. Oh, and this. Mr. Thorne said you're rather attached to this old thing. He nodded towards the piano. Alara's breath hitched. Don't you dare, she shrieked, a raw, animalistic sound escaping her lips. It was her grandfather's piano, the very soul of the Sapphire Lounge. But her plea fell on deaf ears. The third goon, a mountain of muscle, advanced on the beautiful instrument. With a guttural grunt, he raised his heavy boot and brought it down with devastating force onto the keyboard. The elegant ivory keys splintered, emitting a hideous, discordant shriek that tore through the air, a scream of agony that mirrored Alara's own. Another kick, and the polished wood cracked, groaning under the brutal assault. The sound was deafening, sickening, tearing at the very fabric of her being. Each blow was a strike against her history, her memories, her grandfather's legacy. She felt a wave of profound humiliation, a hot flush of shame mixing with her incandescent rage. To be so powerless, so utterly at the mercy of these thugs. Tears, hot and furious, finally streamed down her face, blurring the scene into a tableau of destruction and despair. She lunged forward, a desperate, futile attempt to shield the piano, but the scarred man grabbed her arm, his grip like iron bands. See? So simple, he sneered, pulling her roughly back. Just sign the damn papers and this can all stop. Alara struggled against him, her body trembling, her lungs burning with unshed screams. The smell of dust, shattered wood, and stale beer mingled with the stench of her own fear. It was in this moment of absolute degradation, amidst the chaos and the metallic tang of imminent violence, that she felt a shift in the room's atmosphere. A sudden, profound stillness. It wasn't the silence of fear, but the heavy, charged quiet that precedes an apex predator's entrance. From the deepest shadows near the bar, where the light dared not touch, a figure detached itself. He moved with an almost unnerving grace, his tailored dark suit melting from the gloom, pristine and uncreased despite the pouring rain outside. His expensive leather shoes made no sound on the broken glass, his posture radiating an understated, yet undeniable power. He was tall, impossibly so, with broad shoulders that seemed to command the very air around him. Alara's gaze, tear-filled and blurry, slowly lifted, drawn by some primal instinct. He was a man carved from obsidian, dark hair swept back from a chiseled face, eyes like polished stones, reflecting the faint candlelight with an almost predatory glint. Damon Volkov. The name, whispered on the wind of city rumors, was synonymous with whispered fear and untraceable influence. She'd heard of him, of course. Everyone in this city had. He was a phantom, a myth, a shadow king. His eyes, dark and piercing, cut through the ravaged room, past the stunned thugs, past the fear-stricken Alara, and landed directly on the broken piano. Then slowly, with an almost deliberate lethargy that only amplified its impact, his gaze drifted upwards, finding Alara's face. Time seemed to warp, stretching thin and taut. In those dark, obsidian eyes, Alara saw no pity, no judgment, only a chilling, intense interest. A primal force seemed to emanate from him, a silent declaration that he had arrived, and the world had just pivoted on its axis. He didn't speak, didn't move beyond that initial emergence, yet his presence was a physical weight, pressing down on everyone, demanding absolute attention. The thugs, momentarily stunned by his unexpected appearance, hesitated, their destructive energy deflating under his silent scrutiny. Alara felt a strange, dizzying mix of terror and an almost magnetic pull towards this dangerous, enigmatic man. He was everything she feared, everything that represented the darkness, yet a spark of something unbidden, something dangerous, ignited deep within her. The brute still had her arm, but his grip slackened ever so slightly, his eyes darting between Alara and the newcomer. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Volkov remained unmoving, his dark eyes, like twin abysses, still fixed on Alara. He was an enigma, a beautiful, terrifying force of nature. And for some inexplicable reason, she felt utterly exposed under his unwavering gaze, as if he could see not just her despair, but the wild, defiant fire still burning within her. He took a single, deliberate step forward, and the sound of his shoe crunching on broken glass was deafening. The scar-faced thug, sensing the shift in power, finally released Alara's arm. She stumbled, catching herself on the edge of a shattered table, her gaze still locked with Volkov's. What did he want? Why was he here? And more terrifyingly, what would he do? The questions swirled in her mind, a chaotic symphony. The only certainty was that her life, already hanging by a thread, had just become immeasurably more complicated and profoundly, dangerously changed. The aftermath of that terrifying night settled over Alara like a shroud woven from shattered glass and broken hopes. The Sapphire Lounge, once a beacon of defiant light, now felt like a tomb. The air still carried the metallic tang of fear, mingled with the acrid scent of splintered wood and stale liquor. Her grandfather's piano, its keys mangled, its polished surface gouged, stood on the stage like a broken monument to a glorious past. The sight of it made a raw wound fester in Alara's chest. She spent the next day in a frantic, desperate haste. The image of Damon Volkov, an obsidian phantom emerging from the shadows, burned behind her eyelids, a terrifying enigma she couldn't shake. But terror quickly gave way to the grim reality of her situation. With Thorne's thugs having openly threatened the club, she had no choice but to nail a hastily scribbled, temporarily closed sign to the front door, the cardboard a flimsy shield against the encroaching darkness. Her phone became an extension of her anxiety. She called every number she could find for legal aid, for pro bono lawyers, for any civic organization that might champion a small business against a corporate shark. Each call was a fresh stab of disappointment. I understand, Miss Vance, but Mr. Thorne's firm, they have significant influence. We'd love to help, but our resources are limited, and his legal team is formidable. It's a losing battle, sweetheart. Cut your losses. The phrases echoed in her ears, each one a nail in the coffin of her hope. Thorne's tentacles truly reached everywhere. He wasn't just a developer. He was a viper coiling around the city's arteries, suffocating anyone who dared to stand in his way. Alara felt a chilling sense of isolation, a stark realization that no one was coming to save her. Her fierce independence, once her greatest strength, now felt like a heavy burden, weighing her down into the abyss. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of despair. She would visit the desolate club, running her fingers over the scarred piano, trying to imagine the vibrant melodies that once filled the space. The silence was deafening, a constant reminder of what she was losing. She felt utterly, excruciatingly alone, a single defiant flame flickering weakly against a relentless gale. Then strange things began to happen. Insidious, almost imperceptible shifts in the currents that had been sweeping her towards destruction. First, a cryptic email landed in her spam folder, a single line, check zoning permit B7 phase 4. It made no sense. She almost deleted it, but something urged her to look it up. To her astonishment, zoning permit B7 phase 4, a crucial document for one of Thorne's major downtown projects, had been flagged for an unexpected, lengthy environmental review. A minor setback for him, a monumental delay. Then, a week later, a local newspaper, usually quick to laud Thorne's urban renewal efforts, ran a surprisingly critical expose on the historical negligence of a property Thorne had recently acquired. It wasn't about the Sapphire Lounge, but it chipped away at Thorne's carefully crafted public image. Alara saw a flicker of hope, fragile and terrifying, like a distant star in a perpetually dark sky. These were small victories, almost spectral in their origin, yet they were undeniable. They spoke of an unseen hand, a powerful, guiding force, working in the shadows. And that hand, she knew with a chilling certainty, belonged to Damon Volkov, the obsidian-eyed man who had watched her humiliation without intervention, yet whose presence had commanded the air. The confirmation came on a rainy Tuesday morning, precisely a week after the incident at the club. A sleek black car, so polished it reflected the gray sky like a distorted mirror, pulled up silently outside her cramped apartment. A man emerged, dressed in a sharp, dark suit that seemed to absorb the light. He was Marcus, Volkov's right-hand man, the one often seen hovering in the periphery of city whispers. He carried himself with an effortless authority, his gaze calm but unwavering. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She knew instantly why he was here. The air grew thick with unspoken tension. Miss Vance. Marcus's voice was smooth, devoid of inflection, yet it carried an unnerving weight. Yes, she managed, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. Volkov wishes to speak with you. He believes he can be of assistance regarding the Sapphire Lounge. Assistance. The word hung in the air, laced with a dangerous undertone. She thought of the shattered piano, the crushing debt, Thorne's relentless pursuit. She thought of Volkov's eyes, dark and all-consuming. I don't understand, she stammered, though a part of her understood perfectly. Marcus offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Mr. Volkov has a keen interest in preserving certain elements of the city's heritage, and in ensuring that those who attempt to strong-arm such elements face appropriate consequences. He handed her a small, exquisitely crafted card. It bore no name, only a single elegant symbol, an obsidian raven, wings outstretched. Below it, a simple address and a time for later that evening. Alara stared at the card, its cool, smooth surface a stark contrast to the rough legal papers that had dominated her life. This wasn't just an offer. It was an invitation into a world she instinctively feared. A world of shadows, of unspoken rules, a power so absolute it could twist the law itself. Devil's bargain. Her mind screamed in protest. Her grandfather had been a man of integrity, of music, of light. How could she possibly associate with someone like Volkov? Yet her gaze drifted to the closed jazz club across the street, its temporarily closed sign flapping sadly in the wind. The silence that had replaced the music felt like a physical pain. She imagined Thorne's bulldozers, the final crushing blow. The thought made her stomach clench. What was the alternative? Losing everything? Letting her grandfather's legacy be ground into dust? The hope, fragile as it was, began to assert itself, battling against her ingrained suspicion. What if this was her only chance? What if this dangerous man, this Shadow King, was the only one capable of truly fighting Thorn. The idea was terrifying, seductive, and utterly desperate. She looked back at Marcus, who waited patiently, his expression unreadable. "Tell Mr. Volkov. I'll be there," she finally said, the words feeling foreign and heavy on her tongue. The choice was made. She was stepping into the dark, venturing into the lair of a man whose intentions were as opaque as his obsidian eyes. She knew with a chilling certainty that this decision would change her life forever. But whether it would save her or consume her, she couldn't possibly say. The night loomed, a dangerous promise, and Alara, a moth drawn to a terrifying flame, felt an inexorable pull towards the unknown. The address Marcus had given her led to a discreet, unmarked building tucked between a high-end art gallery and a luxury boutique, its dark facade blending seamlessly into the affluent night. Alara had dressed in her best, a simple, elegant black dress, chosen more for its protective anonymity than for glamour. Yet, as the heavy lacquered door swung open to reveal a plush, silent interior, she felt acutely underdressed, utterly out of place. Marcus greeted her with a nod that was almost a bow, his eyes assessing her in a way that made her skin prickle. He led her down a dimly lit hallway, the silence profound, disturbed only by the soft brush of her own breathing. Every nerve in her body screamed for her to turn back, to run, to embrace the ruin of her beloved club, rather than step deeper into this gilded cage. But the image of the shattered piano, the phantom scream of splintering wood, held her captive. Damon Volkov was waiting in a room that defied categorization. It wasn't an office, nor a living space, but a hybrid of both, a vast expanse of dark wood, rich leather, and stark minimalist art that exuded power and meticulous control. He stood by a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the glittering cityscape, his back to her, a silhouette against the urban tapestry. The light from outside caught the sharp lines of his profile as he turned, his obsidian eyes locking onto hers with an unsettling intensity. "Miss Vance, thank you for coming." His voice, deep and resonant, was smoother than she remembered, a low thrum that vibrated in the air. There was no warmth, but no overt menace either, just an unyielding calm. "Mr. Volkov," she replied, her voice steady, a small victory. She clutched her handbag tighter, the leather digging into her palm. "You said you could help." He gestured to a high-backed leather chair opposite a massive, polished desk. "Please sit." Alara sat, feeling dwarfed by the opulent furnishings by him. He took the chair behind the desk, his movements economical, fluid. A single document lay open before him. The Sapphire Lounge's overdue tax assessments. Her stomach twisted. He knew everything. "Victor Thorne is an annoyance," Volkov began, his gaze unwavering. "A persistent pest. He believes that money and brute force are the only currencies that matter." A faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched his lips. "He's wrong. There are other currencies. Influence, information, and sometimes a simple, undeniable ownership." Alara's breath hitched. "Ownership, indeed." He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the desk. The subtle shift in his posture seemed to fill the room, drawing all oxygen towards him. "I've acquired the outstanding debts on the Sapphire Lounge. The tax liens, the loans, everything." He pushed a thick folder across the desk. "As of this morning, technically, the club is mine." Alara stared at the folder, then at him, her mind reeling. He hadn't just offered help. He had taken control. The fragile hope that had buoyed her was now tainted with a chilling realization. She had merely traded one predator for another. You bought it," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Invested, let's say. A long-term acquisition." His eyes, dark as polished obsidian, seemed to probe her very soul. "It has potential, a certain unique charm, and a certain unique talent." His gaze lingered on her, making her cheeks flush. "But an investment requires oversight and a return." This was it, the devil's bargain. She braced herself. "What do you want?" your continued presence at the club, your music, your management. The Sapphire Lounge will be restored better than before. A jewel. But it will operate under my direction. And you, Miss Vance, will be its face, its voice, and on occasion, my entertainment. The last part, my entertainment, sent a strange shiver down her spine. It wasn't a demand for anything crude or demeaning. It was a subtle, possessive assertion of his claim over her, wrapped in velvet. My entertainment, she repeated, her voice betraying a hint of indignation. He smiled then, a slow, mesmerizing unfurling of his lips that didn't quite reach his eyes. You are a gifted artist, Alara. Your music touches something profound. I find that stimulating. His gaze held hers, an unspoken challenge, a dangerous allure. You will perform at the newly renovated Sapphire Lounge and at certain private events. For my associates. For me. She was trapped. Trapped by debt, by Thorn, and now by this enigmatic, dangerous man. But the thought of the Sapphire Lounge restored, thriving, its music once again filling the night, was a powerful temptation. She imagined the polished keys, the vibrant stage, the laughter. What if I refuse? She asked a last desperate test. His smile vanished, replaced by a steely resolve that made her blood run cold. Then the Sapphire Lounge, legally mine, will be demolished by Mr. Thorne's company. I will simply sell him the deeds. Your grandfather's legacy will become dust, and you, Alara, will face Thorne alone. He will not be as restrained as I. The implicit threat was clear, delivered with a chilling calm that was more terrifying than any shouted anger. She swallowed hard. There was no choice. Her heart ached with a concession, but her spirit, though wounded, recognized the brutal logic. I accept, she said, the words feeling like a surrender, the flicker of something, satisfaction, triumph, crossed his dark eyes. Wise? We begin immediately. The following weeks were a whirlwind of dizzying change. The Sapphire Lounge was a hive of activity, but not of demolition. Instead, the finest contractors and artisans, all clearly working under Volkov's unseen direction, swarmed the place. The shattered piano was removed, replaced within days by an even grander, custom-built instrument. New velvet upholstery, polished brass fixtures, a state-of-the-art sound system, all materialized as if by magic. Alara found herself overseeing the transformation, but always with the quiet, watchful presence of Volkov's men. Volkov himself was a paradox. He would appear unannounced, observing her as she supervised the renovations, his gaze intense, absorbing every detail. He would often ask for her input on design choices, surprisingly deferential to her artistic vision for the club. The lighting for the stage, Alara, he'd said one afternoon, his voice soft, almost conversational. Should it be warmer? More intimate for jazz. She'd been surprised. Warmer, yes. It should feel like an embrace, not a spotlight. He'd simply nodded, and the next day a team of lighting experts arrived. During these encounters, Alara found unexpected facets of the man. Beneath the dangerous exterior was a meticulous intellect, a sharp eye for aesthetics, and a perplexing, almost tender interest in her music. He would often ask her to play for him, alone in the newly restored club. She'd play, her music filling the empty space, and he would simply listen, his expression unreadable, yet his posture relaxed, almost vulnerable. That piece, he murmured one evening after she'd played a particularly haunting rendition of a forgotten jazz standard. It speaks of longing and regret. Alara had been stunned. Most people heard only the melody. He heard the emotion, the soul. Perhaps, she'd replied, a strange warmth spreading through her chest. It speaks of what is lost and what might never be found. He observed her with a quiet intensity that was unnerving, yet captivating. He noticed her exhaustion, sending discreet meals to her apartment. He ensured her safety, assigning 2 silent, impeccably dressed men to guard the club's perimeter whenever she was there. She never saw them unless she looked for them, their presence a constant, subtle reminder of the dangerous web she had stepped into. One evening, performing at a private gathering in Volkov's penthouse, a dizzying expanse of glass and steel filled with powerful, silent men and exquisitely dressed women, she saw a different side of his world. The opulence was overwhelming, the whispers of power palpable. From the stage, she watched Volkov move through the room, a silent king among his subjects. She saw him exchange a few clipped words with a man whose eyes held a flicker of fear. Volkov's voice was too low to hear, but his posture, the subtle tightening of his jaw, spoke volumes. It was a glimpse into the ruthless machinery that allowed him to exist, a chilling reminder of the man behind the unexpected politeness. The contrast between the ruthless Shadow King and the man who discussed stage lighting with her, who listened to her music with such profound attention, was intoxicating. She was terrified of him, of the power he wielded, of the unseen threads that bound her to his world. Yet a dangerous curiosity stirred within her. Who was Damon Volkov, truly? And as his dark eyes would occasionally meet hers across a crowded room, a silent message passing between them, Alara felt an undeniable, treacherous pull. A spark, both thrilling and terrifying, igniting in the depths of her soul. She knew she was dancing on the edge of a precipice, but the music and the man were too compelling to resist. And for some reason, she felt safer in his dangerous orbit than she ever had truly alone. The scent of fresh paint and polished would fill Alara's lungs, a stark, invigorating contrast to the stale despair of weeks past. The Sapphire Lounge, once a decaying relic, was now a dazzling jewel, its stage gleaming under soft, intimate lighting. The new piano, a sleek, obsidian behemoth, responded to her touch with a resonance that thrilled her to her core. Volkov's investment had transformed her grandfather's legacy into something truly magnificent, a place where music could once again soar. Yet even amidst this beauty, a subtle unease clung to her, a constant whisper of the unseen hand that had orchestrated it all. She worked late, polishing the final details, arranging the sheet music for the grand reopening. The silence of the empty club was a comfort, a canvas for her thoughts. Volkov's men were always present, shadowy figures who materialized and dematerialized with unnerving efficiency. Tonight, two of them were stationed discreetly near the back exit, their stoic faces unreadable. She no longer found their presence terrifying, but rather a peculiar form of reassurance. A golden cage, perhaps, but a safe one. As the clock neared midnight, Alara gathered her things. The city outside was a symphony of distant sirens and the rumble of late-night traffic. A light drizzle had begun, casting a slick sheen on the cobblestone alley behind the club. She pulled her scarf tighter, the sudden chill biting at her exposed skin. The alley, usually a shortcut to her apartment, felt darker, more suffocating tonight. She was only a few steps from the club's sturdy back door when a shadow detached itself from the deeper gloom near the overflowing dumpsters. Then another, and another. 3 figures, hulking and familiar. Thorne's men. Her heart seized in her chest, a cold, painful clench. The 2 guards Volkov had assigned were nowhere in sight. A wave of primal terror washed over her, chilling her to the bone. They hadn't forgotten. Thorne hadn't forgotten. The tallest of them, the same scarred brute from that devastating night, stepped forward, his eyes glinting with malicious triumph. Well, well, look what we have here. The little songbird. Thought you were safe, did you? His voice was a low snarl, laced with venom. Alara stumbled backward, her hand flying to her throat. Stay away from me, she gasped, her voice thin and reedy with fear. Her carefully constructed sense of security crumbled around her like brittle glass. She was alone again, truly alone. The brute laughed, a coarse, ugly sound that scraped against her nerves. Mr. Thorne doesn't take kindly to people interfering with his business, especially pretty little things like you. He sent us to remind you what happens when you play with bigger boys. He took another menacing step, his gaze dropping to her trembling hands, then rising slowly, possessively, to her face. His companions flanked her, cutting off any escape. Just as the brute reached out a hand, his fingers twitching, ready to grab her, a blur of motion erupted from the shadows just beyond them. It was swift, silent, and utterly brutal. One of Thorne's men grunted, a strangled sound, and crumpled to the ground before Alara could even register the attack. The second spun around, a flash of something metallic in his hand, but he was met with a swift, powerful kick to the knee that sent him howling to the ground. Alara gasped, her eyes wide with shock and a terrifying relief. Marcus. It was Marcus, Volkov's right-hand man, a ghost in the shadows, moving with deadly precision. He hadn't used a weapon, no gun, no knife, just raw, efficient power. The two guards Alara had seen earlier suddenly appeared, flanking Marcus, their faces grim, their hands already concealed but clearly ready. They were faster, more silent, more deadly than any thug Thorne could hire. The scarred brute, momentarily stunned by the swift, merciless dispatch of his companions, hesitated. His eyes, now wide with a dawning fear, darted from Marcus to the fallen men, then finally to Alara. The malice in his gaze was replaced by a cold, unsettling realization. He was outmatched. Marcus stepped closer to the brute, his movements fluid and unhurried, yet radiating an undeniable threat. He didn't speak, but his mere presence was a tangible warning. He simply tilted his head, a subtle gesture, then pointed towards the crumpled figures on the ground, then back towards the mouth of the alley. The message was clear, Leaf. No, and don't come back. The brute swallowed hard, his bravado utterly evaporated. He cast one last, lingering, resentful look at Alara, a look that promised future vengeance, then turned and limped away into the rain-swept night, dragging his injured accomplice with him. The third man, still writhing on the ground, was swiftly and silently encouraged to follow, a clear message having been delivered. Alara stood trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The cold rain seemed to wash over her, but it couldn't quench the chaotic fire raging within her. Relief flooded her, so profound it made her knees weak. She was safe, but the manner of her safety was a terrifying revelation. It was then that she felt the presence directly behind her. Not Marcus, whose subtle movements she had begun to recognize. This was different. He was closer, his scent, a subtle, expensive cologne mingled with something darker, undeniably masculine, enveloping her. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. The air suddenly crackled with a potent, possessive energy that made her entire body hum. Are you harmed, Alara? Volkov's voice, a low, dangerous rumble, was right behind her ear, sending a shiver that was both fear and something disturbingly akin to pleasure down her spine. His hand, warm and firm, settled on her arm, a possessive anchor. She shook her head, unable to speak, her gaze fixed on the empty alley. The brutality of what had just transpired, though quick and silent, had been undeniable. These men, his men, were capable of terrifying things. And he, Damon Volkov, was their conductor. He turned her gently, his hand sliding from her arm to cup her jaw, forcing her to meet his gaze. His obsidian eyes, usually so controlled, now burned with a cold, terrifying fire. The anger wasn't directed at her, but at the audacity of anyone who dared to touch what was his. Thorne is a fool, he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, yet radiating a chilling promise of retribution. He misunderstands the nature of ownership. His thumb stroked her cheek, a soft, intimate gesture that belied the dangerous intensity in his eyes. You are mine to protect, Alara. And no one, not Thorne, not anyone, touches what is mine. His words, a blunt declaration of possession, resonated deep within her, a terrifying echo of his power. Panic warred with an intoxicating sense of security. She was not just safe, she was claimed. The realization sent a hot flush through her veins. He saw her not as a damsel in distress, but as a prized possession, fiercely guarded. It was frightening, humbling, and in a twisted, primal way, profoundly alluring. The line between predator and protector had blurred, and Alara, standing in the rain-soaked alley, felt a dangerous, bewildering surge of something akin to. This was the true nature of Damon Volkov, a a man who would burn the world to keep what he considered his own. And now she knew she was his. The implications of that knowledge settled deep in her bones, a chilling warmth that promised a future bound by shadows and an undeniable, dangerous devotion. The rain had long ceased, leaving the city air washed clean, sharp with the lingering scent of damp earth and distant exhaust. Yet, for Alara, the chill of the alley still clung to her, a phantom coldness against her skin. Volkov had escorted her back to her apartment himself, his presence a silent, formidable shield against the lingering shadows of Thorne's desperate attack. He hadn't left until he saw her safely inside, his eyes sweeping her small living room with an almost clinical assessment before he finally departed, leaving her with an unnerving sense of both relief and profound disquiet. The night that followed was a blur of restless sleep and waking nightmares, the image of Marcus's brutal efficiency replaying in her mind, interspersed with Volkov's dark, possessive gaze. "You are mine to protect, Alara." The words echoed, a dangerous lullaby. She was still trembling, not just from fear, but from the raw, potent power she had witnessed. It was terrifying. It was also undeniably safe. A safety purchased at a price she couldn't yet comprehend, but a safety nonetheless. The next afternoon, she found herself drawn back to the Sapphire Lounge. The workers had gone, leaving the newly renovated space in pristine silence. The grand piano gleamed, a testament to Volkov's limitless resources. She ran her fingers over the smooth, unblemished keys, a stark contrast to the shattered wreckage from a week ago. This place, her grandfather's legacy, was reborn, but it was no longer entirely hers. She sank onto the velvet-covered piano bench, the plush fabric yielding to her weight. Her heart felt heavy, a confusing mix of gratitude and a strange, almost fearful yearning. She played softly at first, a hesitant melody, then let her emotions pour out through the keys. It was a lament, a song of loss and survival, a tribute to the man who built this place, and a bewildered acknowledgement of the dangerous man who saved it. She was lost in the music when she heard it, the faint creak of the front door. Her hands froze on the keys. She hadn't heard a car, no footsteps outside. He moved like a ghost, a predator silently entering its lair. Damon Volkov. He walked towards the stage, his usual dark suit impeccable, his movements fluid and soundless. He stopped a few feet from the piano, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. The dim light caught the sharp angles of his face, accentuating the shadows beneath his eyes, hinting at a weariness she hadn't noticed before. He simply stood there, listening to the silence, his gaze fixed on the piano, then slowly to her. "Your music," he said, his voice a low, almost intimate murmur in the vast silence of the club. "It speaks volumes." Alara swallowed, her throat suddenly tight. "It's all I have left to say." He nodded, a subtle tilt of his head. "The piano. It is a magnificent instrument. Your grandfather's." "His soul," she corrected, a soft, wistful smile touching her lips. "He poured everything into this club, into his music. He taught me everything." Her gaze drifted around the opulent, yet still deeply personal space. He dreamed of making this place a beacon, a place where every note told a story, where every soul found a moment of peace. A sigh escaped her. He was an artist, a dreamer. She looked at Volkov, truly looked at him, searching for something in those obsidian eyes. "It's why I couldn't let Thorne destroy it. It wasn't just a building. It was a promise. His promise. My promise." She traced the edge of a key with her finger. He died too young, before he saw his full vision realized. I wanted to finish it for him." Her voice cracked, betraying the raw vulnerability she usually kept hidden. To honor him. Volkov remained silent, his expression unreadable, yet there was a stillness about him, an absence of his usual controlled intensity that encouraged her. A strange, hesitant trust began to bloom within her, fragile but undeniable. He had saved her, saved the club. And for the first time, she truly believed he understood, at some fundamental level, what this place meant. He took a step closer, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. A promise, he repeated, the word a heavy stone in his deep voice. Some promises are heavier than others. More binding. He paused, his gaze distant, as if looking into a memory. My father, he built his own empire. Different kind of legacy. One of necessity, not dreams. A faint, bitter twist played on his lips. He taught me power. How to take it. How to keep it. But he never taught me how to build something beautiful. Something that lasts beyond brute force. Alara watched him, stunned by the unexpected glimpse into his world. He wasn't just a ruthless king. He was a son, burdened by a legacy, seeking something beyond mere dominance. The coldness, the control, suddenly made a different kind of sense. It was a shield, a carefully constructed armor against a world that demanded ruthlessness. You regretted it, she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He met her gaze, his dark eyes now holding a flicker of something raw, something akin to sorrow. Regret is a luxury I rarely afford myself. But there are costs. Always costs. And sometimes the cost is to your own soul. His hand, strong and scarred, moved towards the polished surface of the piano, but didn't quite touch it. My father died violently, protecting his empire. He left me to inherit a throne forged in blood and betrayal. His voice was low, devoid of self-pity, yet imbued with a profound, almost ancient weariness. I learned quickly that sentiment was a weakness, that the only way to survive was to be colder, harder, more ruthless than anyone who dared to challenge me. Alara felt a wave of profound empathy wash over her. His world was a brutal mirror of her own struggle, but magnified 1,000-fold. She had fought for a dream. He had fought for survival, for power, inheriting a burden that was both crown and curse. He was a king, yes, but a king forged in fire, bearing scars that ran far deeper than any she could imagine. And now, she asked, her voice soft, inviting. He turned his gaze back to her, and in his obsidian eyes she saw not just the dangerous predator, but a man haunted by ghosts, seeking something he perhaps couldn't even name. Now, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, I find myself interested in building, in cultivating something beautiful, something that has meaning beyond acquisition. His gaze held hers, intense and possessive, a silent vow passing between them. And I find myself fiercely protective of what I claim. His hand finally moved, not to the piano, but to her own hand, resting on the keys. His fingers, strong and warm, closed over hers, a gentle yet undeniable grip. A jolt, electric and profound, shot through her. It wasn't just physical. It was a connection of souls, two damaged beings finding an unexpected solace in each other's presence. He was the darkness, she was the fading light, and yet, in that moment, they converged, two halves of a dangerous, intoxicating whole. Alara felt her own heart ache with a burgeoning possessiveness. She was terrified of him, yes, but she also felt an undeniable desire to soothe the invisible wounds that lay beneath his polished exterior. A dangerous, intoxicating bond had just been forged in the silent, music-filled air of the Sapphire Lounge. She was his undeniably, but she also, in a way she couldn't explain, felt that he was hers too, bound by shared secrets, by unveiled scars, and by a terrifying mutual understanding that transcended worlds. The music would begin again soon, but their story, a melody both dark and beautiful, had truly just found its harmony. The Sapphire Lounge had become a nightly symphony of triumph. Its grand reopening had been an unqualified success, the crowds returning, drawn by the club's renewed splendor and Alara's captivating voice. She performed with a newfound passion, her music now laced with a rich complexity that echoed the dangerous beauty of her life. Volkov was often there, a silent sentinel in his private booth, his obsidian gaze never leaving her. Their shared confession in the quiet of the empty club had forged an invisible, potent tether between them, a bond that both thrilled and terrified her. She was a moth irrevocably drawn to his flame, knowing it could consume her, yet unable to pull away. She had begun to trust him, a fragile, dangerous thing, built on unspoken promises and the undeniable security he offered. He was a paradox, a ruthless king of shadows who ordered rare tea for her after late-night performances and remembered the exact tempo of her grandfather's favorite piece. She saw the scars beneath his polished exterior, the weight of a legacy he hadn't chosen, and a strange maternal instinct stirred within her, warring with the raw primal attraction. She was his in a way she never expected, and the thought, once terrifying, now held an intoxicating allure. It was during this deceptive lull, this period of fragile peace, that the serpent stirred again. Alara received a handwritten note, delivered by a nondescript courier, claiming to be from a renowned jazz critic. It praised her recent performances, lauded the Sapphire Lounge's revival, and requested a private, off-the-record interview at a secluded historic gallery on the city's waterfront. The critic, a legend in the jazz world, rarely granted such audiences. It was an opportunity too significant to refuse, a chance to solidify the Sapphire's burgeoning reputation, to finally fulfill her grandfather's dream. Volkov was away on one of his frequent mysterious business trips, a fact that nagged at her, but she dismissed it as a fleeting shadow. He would want this for the club, she told herself. The gallery was a beautiful old building, its brick facade softened by climbing ivy, its windows reflecting the gray, choppy waters of the bay. The invitation specified a discreet side entrance. Alara, dressed elegantly but simply, her heart thrumming with a mix of excitement and nerves, pushed open the heavy oak door. The interior was dimly lit, hushed, the air thick with the scent of aged canvas and faint dust. Paintings, dark and abstract, lined the walls, their enigmatic forms mirroring her own confused emotions about her life. "Hello," she called out, her voice echoing in the vast empty space. "Mr. Dubois?" No answer. A prickle of unease snaked down her spine. The silence was too profound, too absolute. This wasn't right. Her instinct, sharpened by months in Volkov's orbit, screamed a silent warning. Just as she turned to leave, a heavy metallic clang reverberated through the gallery. The doors slammed shut behind her, the sound like a gunshot in the oppressive quiet. Darkness engulfed her as the limited lights flickered and died. A wave of ice-cold dread washed over her, a premonition of inescapable doom. She was trapped. A gruff voice cut through the ensuing silence, chilling her to the bone. Well, the little songbird. Thought you could fly away, did you? The scarred brute. Thorn's enforcer." Alara gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. Her blood ran cold. No, it can't be. The lights flickered back on, revealing not the critic, but Victor Thorne himself, his face contorted into a triumphant, cruel sneer. He was flanked by his goons, their eyes glinting with a renewed, predatory hunger. But beside Thorne, a new figure emerged from the shadows, a man Alara vaguely recognized from one of Volkov's private parties, a minor associate known for his ambitious, slippery nature. His name was Anton, and his presence sent a bolt of pure terror through her. Anton? Here? With Thorne? Thorne, Alara whispered, her voice trembling. How did you? Thorne chuckled, harsh, grating sound. Volkov's protection, it seems, isn't as impenetrable as he'd like you to believe, especially when his own associates grow tired of his arrogance. He gestured to Anton, who gave Alara a condescending smirk. Anton here was kind enough to inform me of Volkov's little excursions and his little weaknesses. His gaze lingered on Alara, thick with a sickening possessiveness. He thinks you're a prize, a pet, but you're just a pawn, Alara. A very useful pawn. A fresh wave of shock, cold and devastating, crashed over her. And Volkov's associate. Betrayal. It hit her with the force of a physical blow. The tea, the quiet conversations, the subtle protection. Had it all been a lie? A carefully constructed facade to lure her into a false sense of security, to make her his weakness? The raw wound in her chest festered, now bleeding with suspicion and a searing pain that felt far worse than any physical threat. Volkov, the man who spoke of shared scars and guarded promises, had he truly betrayed her? Had she been so foolish, so naive to trust a man forged in shadows? No, she choked out, shaking her head vehemently, trying to dispel the horrifying thought. He wouldn't. Thorne's smirk widened. Oh, but he would. Or perhaps he simply doesn't care enough. He's a busy man, Miss Vance. Empires don't build themselves. And sometimes collateral damage is acceptable. He took a step closer, his eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. He left you vulnerable, Alara. A tempting bait. And I, for one, couldn't resist. The words struck her like daggers. Vulnerable. Bait. The terrifying realization settled deep in her bones. Volkov, for all his dangerous charm and possessive devotion, was still a king of shadows. And in his world, even those he claimed could be sacrificed on the altar of power. The empathy, the connection, the fleeting hope she had felt, it was all a cruel illusion. He had used her, perhaps even set her up, to expose a weakness in his own network, or simply underestimated Thorne's desperate cunning. Either way, she was alone, betrayed, and utterly, devastatingly, at the mercy of her true enemy. Her mind raced, a frantic torrent of images. Her grandfather's proud face, the shattered piano, Volkov's dark eyes, his hand covering hers. Had it all been a calculated game? A chilling wave of despair washed over her, heavier than any physical chains. She was not only facing an uncertain, terrifying fate, but the crushing weight of a broken trust, a shattered illusion of connection. Thorne gestured to his men. Take her. Mr. Volkov will be most interested to see what happens to his little songbird when she's left unprotected. He paused, his gaze sweeping over her terrified face. Or perhaps he won't care at all. Rough hands seized Alara, pulling her violently backwards. She struggled, a strangled cry escaping her lips, but their grip was inescapable. Panic clawed at her throat, suffocating her. Her vision blurred, the abstract paintings on the walls seeming to mock her with their distorted realities. She felt herself being dragged deeper into the darkened gallery, a chilling, desperate question screaming in her soul. Will he come? Does he even know? Does he even care? Or am I truly, fatally alone? The vast, cold darkness of the gallery swallowed her, a chilling abyss from which she might never return. The message reached Damon Volkov in a sterile, glass-walled skyscraper overlooking Tokyo, a place as far removed from the soulful hum of the Sapphire Lounge as possible. It was a single cryptic text from Marcus. The songbird is gone. Snared. The words, stark and chilling, felt like a physical blow. The delicate teacup in Volkov's hand, a priceless antique, shattered, its shards scattering across the polished mahogany table with a sharp, violent clatter. The Japanese executives stiffened, their carefully composed faces momentarily blanching. Volkov didn't even notice. Gone. Alara. A primal roar, silent but deafening, tore through him. His carefully constructed mask of composure, honed over decades of ruthless control, cracked and crumbled. Fury, raw and incandescent, surged through his veins, hotter than any inferno. It was an emotion he hadn't felt with such visceral intensity since his father's assassination, a brutal, annihilating rage that threatened to consume everything in its path. He had allowed himself a single vulnerability, a fragile, melodious light in his shadowed world, and now it had been ripped away. The thought of Alara, terrified, alone, in the hands of Thorne, made something cold and lethal coalesce deep within his obsidian eyes. Marcus, he grated into his secure comms, his voice a low, terrifying growl that carried across oceans. Locate her. Burn the city if you have to. Find her. And bring me the head of anyone who dared to touch what is mine. His orders were concise, chillingly clear. Anton. The name was spit like venom. Confirm his involvement. And if he did, ensure he regrets his betrayal in ways he cannot possibly imagine. Volkov moved like a force of nature. His private jet, a marvel of speed and luxury, was airborne within the hour. During the agonizing flight, he wasn't calm. He was a storm contained, a silent tempest brewing. His mind worked with brutal efficiency, sifting through intel, calling in favors, mobilizing every asset, every dark corner of his vast, unseen empire. He gave orders without mercy, his voice a steady, terrifying drone, cutting through the fear of his subordinates like a sharpened blade. No one slept. No one rested. The city would bleed until Alara was found. Meanwhile, Alara's world was a suffocating abyss. She was bound, gagged, and blindfolded, thrown into a small, damp room that reeked of mildew and stale cigar smoke. The cold, rough concrete floor bit into her skin, and the ropes chafed her wrists raw. Her head throbbed, a relentless drumbeat of terror. Thorne's triumphant sneer, Anton's chilling betrayal. It all replayed in a horrific loop. She had been so foolish, so utterly blind to the true nature of the world she had dared to enter. Her internal monologue was a chaotic symphony of despair. He won't come. He betrayed me. He abandoned me. The thought was a searing brand, burning deeper than any physical pain. The fleeting trust, the shared confessions, the dangerous allure. It had all been a lie, a means to an end. Or perhaps she was simply not worth the trouble. A mere pawn, as Thorne had so cruelly stated. The realization was a death knell to her fragile hope. Tears, hot and silent, streamed from beneath her blindfold, tasting of salt and bitter resignation. But beneath the despair, a flicker of defiance stubbornly refused to die. Her grandfather's voice, a faint echo in her mind, reminded her, "Never stop fighting, Alara. Even when the music stops, your spirit sings on." She tried to wriggle her wrists to test the ropes, but they held fast. Her situation was hopeless. Yet a tiny, desperate part of her still clung to the impossible, to the dangerous man with obsidian eyes who had once, against all odds, offered her protection. Could he truly have abandoned her? The sun had barely begun to touch the Philadelphia skyline, painting the edges of the grim industrial district in bruised purples and blood oranges when Volkov's forces converged. Marcus, pale but efficient, met him on the tarmac. The gallery was a decoy, boss. They moved her to Thorne's old warehouse, the one near the docks. Anton was the inside man. He passed intel on your travel, your vulnerabilities. Volkov's eyes narrowed, glittering with a cold, predatory light. Anton, the name was a death sentence. And Thorne, he's there, planning to make an example. Marcus hesitated. He knows she means something to you, boss. He knows nothing. Volkov snarled, his voice a low, guttural sound that promised utter devastation. He will learn. He moved with a terrible grace, a man possessed. He wore a tactical vest beneath his dark jacket, his movements precise, deadly. The metallic glint of a silenced pistol peeked from his holster. This was not the sophisticated businessman who discussed jazz lighting. This was the mafia boss, the predator king, fully unleashed. The warehouse was a fortress, dilapidated and menacing. Volkov didn't wait. He didn't negotiate. He gave a single, curt order to Marcus: breach. Contain. No survivors, unless I say so. The assault was swift, brutal, and coordinated with chilling precision. Volkov's men, a silent legion of trained killers, swarmed the perimeter. Distant screams, the sharp crack of silenced gunfire, the sickening thud of bodies hitting concrete. The symphony of retribution had begun. Volkov, however, went in alone through a less guarded entrance, a ghost in his own storm. He moved through the labyrinthine corridors of the warehouse like a shadow, his senses heightened, his fury a cold, guiding fire. The metallic tang of gunpowder mixed with the stale air. He passed Thorne's men, disarmed and neutralized by Marcus's team, their eyes wide with fear. But he ignored them. His sole focus was Alara. He heard muffled voices coming from a larger chamber at the heart of the warehouse. He kicked open the heavy metal door with a resounding crash that echoed through the vast space. The scene that greeted him ignited the last embers of his control. Alara was tied to a chair, still blindfolded, her face streaked with tears, her body slumped in despair. Thorn stood over her, a cruel smile on his face, a gleaming knife held casually in his hand, its tip resting just beneath her chin. Anton was there too, smirking, watching the unfolding horror. Well, if it isn't the great Damon Volkov, Thorn sneered, his eyes widening slightly at Volkov's sudden, terrifying entrance. You're late to the party, boss. Your little songbird here was just about to sing a very different tune. He pressed the knife point slightly against Alara's skin. A small gasp escaped her lips. Volkov's eyes, burning with a cold, annihilating rage, locked onto Thorn. His face was a mask of death. You made a grave error, Thorn, he said, his voice a low, terrifying growl that resonated with ancient power. You touched what is mine. Before Thorn could react, Volkov's pistol was out, aimed with chilling precision. Anton, seeing the raw fury in Volkov's eyes, made a desperate lunge for his own weapon. But Volkov was faster. A single, muffled shot echoed. Anton crumpled, a surprised gurgle escaping his lips as he fell, a dark stain blossoming on his expensive shirt. Betrayal repaid in blood. Thorn, momentarily stunned by Anton's swift demise, hesitated, his eyes darting between Alara and Volkov. The knife wavered. You bastard. You'll never get out of here. I don't need to get out, Volkov replied, taking a slow, deliberate step forward, his gaze never leaving Thorn's. I'm here for her. His next words were uttered with a terrifying, absolute certainty. And then, Thorn, you will suffer. Thorn, fueled by a desperate, cornered animal's rage, lunged at Alara, intending to make good on his threat. But Volkov was already moving. He was a blur of lethal grace, a dark force of nature. He closed the distance between them in an instant, tackling Thorn with brutal force, sending the knife skittering across the concrete floor. The ensuing fight was short, sharp, and decisively one-sided. Volkov moved with a terrifying efficiency, his blows precise, crushing. He didn't just fight. He systematically dismantled Thorn, each punch, each kick, infused with the fury of a man whose most precious possession had been threatened. Thorn's desperate grunts and pleas were met with cold, unyielding silence. Volkov was relentless, a force of vengeance, repaying every moment of Alara's terror, every splintered key of her piano, with merciless precision. He dragged Thorn up by the collar, his face twisted in raw, animalistic rage. You thought you could break her, Volkov snarled, his voice a guttural rasp. You thought you could use her. You were wrong. His fist connected with Thorn's jaw with a sickening crack, sending him sprawling. Then, with a final, chillingly deliberate movement, Volkov turned, his eyes fixed on Alara. He reached her in 2 strides, his hands, still trembling slightly with residual fury, carefully untying the blindfold. Her eyes, wide and terrified, blinked rapidly, adjusting to the dim light, then fixed on his face. She saw the rage still burning, but beneath it an overwhelming, possessive relief. He then untied her wrists, his touch surprisingly gentle against her raw skin. She was still shaking, silent tears streaming down her face, but she felt a profound, undeniable safety. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb gently wiping away a tear. Alara, he murmured, his voice rough with emotion, his gaze fierce, possessive. You are safe. He pulled her into his arms, a tight, unyielding embrace that spoke volumes. She buried her face in his chest, inhaling the scent of his expensive cologne, gunpowder, and something else, something distinctly him, a dark, comforting anchor. He lifted her, cradling her against his chest as he turned, his gaze sweeping over his men who had now entered the chamber, having secured the warehouse. Their faces were grim, but their eyes held a flicker of understanding. Volkov looked at Thorn, who lay broken and barely conscious on the floor. His voice, now cold and devoid of all mercy, cut through the silence. No one, he declared, his voice echoing through the vast space, a chilling decree, touches what is mine, ever. He held Alara tighter, his grip an undeniable claim, a silent promise of eternal protection, bought with fire and blood. Alara, held securely in his arms, understood completely. She was no longer just the bankrupt singer. She was his protected, his claimed. And the price for ever daring to challenge that claim would be absolute, annihilating retribution. The soft, unfamiliar scent of expensive linen and antiseptic filled Alara's senses as she slowly surfaced from a haze of exhaustion. Her body ached, a dull, persistent throb in her wrists and the back of her head, but it was the profound emptiness in her gut that truly lingered, a chilling echo of her recent terror. She wasn't in her apartment. The room was vast, bathed in the muted glow of dawn, revealing sleek, minimalist furniture and walls the color of moonlight. Volkov's penthouse. His gilded cage. He was there, of course. Damon Volkov sat in a high-backed leather chair by the window, a dark, imposing silhouette against the burgeoning light. He hadn't moved since he had carried her here, personally overseeing the medics who had checked her over, his gaze never leaving her face. The raw fury that had contorted his features in the warehouse had receded, replaced by a cold, unwavering intensity that was almost more terrifying. He was silent, watchful, like a sentinel guarding a prized possession. Alara. His voice, a low rumble, broke the hushed silence. How do you feel? She tried to sit up, a sharp pain in her shoulders. Sore, she managed, her voice hoarse. Her gaze drifted to her bandaged wrists, then back to him. And numb, and utterly, irrevocably aware of the price of his protection. He rose, moving with a silent grace that spoke of contained power. He brought her a glass of water, the crystal cool against her lips. His touch, as he helped her sip, was surprisingly gentle, yet there was an undeniable possessiveness in the way his fingers brushed her cheek, tracing the lingering tear tracks. You are safe now, he stated, his voice a quiet command. No one will touch you again. The promise was absolute, delivered with a chilling certainty that left no room for doubt. The days that followed were a blur of meticulous, almost suffocating care. She was confined to the penthouse, a luxurious prison, but a prison nonetheless. Doctors came and went, silent, efficient, all under Volkov's watchful eye. He provided her with the finest clothes, the most exquisite food, anything she desired. But her movements were monitored, her calls screened, her world narrowed to the confines of his high-rise sanctuary. He spent hours with her, sitting in silence, sometimes reading, sometimes simply watching her, his presence a constant, heavy weight. He never apologized for the danger, never excused the brutality she had witnessed. He simply was. And then she started to hear the whispers. Not from him, never directly from him, but from Marcus, who brought her updates on the Sapphire Lounge's reconstruction, and in guarded phone calls she managed to overhear between Volkov and his lieutenant, Victor Thorne. The name was synonymous with ruin. His entire real estate empire, once seemingly impregnable, was crumbling. Banks were calling in loans. Investors were pulling out. Projects were seized. It wasn't just a business failure. It was a systematic dismantling, precise and merciless. Thorne's connections, once his greatest strength, were now turning on him, their fear of Volkov outweighing any loyalty to the disgraced developer. Rumors swirled that Thorne himself had simply vanished. No body, no trace, just an empty mansion and a life erased. And Anton. The name alone brought a cold shudder. Marcus mentioned him once casually. Anton's absence has been noted. A shame. Some betrayals are unforgivable. The veiled threat, the unspoken finality, sent a chill through Alara. She didn't need details. She understood. Volkov's wrath, once unleashed, was absolute. Alara lay awake one night, staring at the glittering city lights, the physical wounds healing, but the psychological ones festering. She had seen it. The inferno in his eyes, the brutal efficiency of his retaliation. He hadn't just protected her. He annihilated those who dared to threaten his claim. The man who sat silently listening to her jazz, who spoke of building something beautiful, was also the architect of ruin, a king whose throne was built on fear and unquestioning loyalty. One evening, as she sat on the plush sofa, Wrapped in a cashmere blanket, a cup of Volkov's preferred Earl Grey steaming beside her, she finally spoke the words that had been tormenting her. "Thorne and Anton," she began, her voice a little shaky. Volkov, who had been engrossed in a financial report, slowly lowered the tablet, his obsidian gaze meeting hers. "They posed a threat to you. They were eliminated." His tone was flat, devoid of emotion, as if discussing a minor inconvenience. "Eliminated." Her voice was barely a whisper. "What does that mean, Damon?" He held her gaze, unwavering. "It means they will no longer harm you, or anyone under my protection." He paused, then added, with chilling clarity, "It means their existence has been rendered obsolete. In every way that matters." Alara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. You destroyed them." "I'm sure their actions would have irreversible consequences," he corrected, his voice still calm, yet radiating an undeniable power. "Such is the price of challenging my authority, and the cost of touching what is mine." His eyes, dark as the deepest night, held hers in an unbreakable grip. "This is my world, Alara. The world I inhabit. The world that now protects you. Do you understand?" Her breath hitched. She understood. She understood the true, terrifying extent of the man she had allowed into her life. The man who had saved her, cherished her, but also controlled her, owned her. She was safe, yes, but at what cost? Could she live with this darkness, with the knowledge that her security was built on the ashes of others, on the silent brutality he wielded? This wasn't the world of gentle jazz melodies and heartfelt dreams. This was a world of shadows, of unspoken violence, of absolute power. A part of her, the innocent, artistic part, recoiled in horror. It screamed for escape, for the simple, complicated life she had once yearned for. But another part, a deeper, more primal part, found itself strangely drawn to it. The absolute protection. The unwavering devotion, dark and possessive as it was. The feeling of being so utterly claimed, so fiercely guarded, resonated with a loneliness she had carried for too long. He was a monster, perhaps, but her monster. And in his obsidian eyes, she saw not just the abyss, but also a reflection of her own burgeoning strength, her own capacity for survival. He reached for her hand, his fingers strong, scarred, yet tender as they closed around hers. "The Sapphire Lounge will reopen," he said, his voice a soft, compelling murmur. "It will be more beautiful than you imagined. A testament to you, to us." His thumb stroked the back of her hand, a possessive comfort. "But you must understand, Alara. This is the truth of my world. And by accepting my protection, you accept its nature." She looked into his eyes, searching for a lie, a hint of weakness, anything to escape the truth. But there was only an unyielding, absolute conviction. He was offering her an empire built on ashes, protected by his formidable, terrifying might. And she, a bankrupt singer lost in the storm, had nothing left to offer but her music and her soul. The fragile peace she felt was real, but it was a peace bought with blood and power. And as her gaze met his, Alara knew, with a chilling certainty, that she was willing to pay the price. The darkness, vast and terrifying, was no longer just outside. It was becoming a part of her, a dangerous melody she was learning to embrace. And she wondered, with a shiver, if she would ever be able to sing the same gentle songs again. The air in the Sapphire Lounge, once heavy with the ghosts of fading dreams, now crackled with a vibrant, intoxicating energy. The grand reopening night was a triumph. The scent of aged whiskey mingled with fresh-cut roses and the subtle, expensive perfumes of a discerning, affluent crowd. Every surface gleamed, from the polished brass railings to the newly laid herringbone floor. The velvet booths, now a richer, deeper sapphire blue, beckoned with plush comfort. On the stage, bathed in a warm, golden glow, sat the magnificent obsidian grand piano, a testament to rebirth. Alara stood backstage, her heart thrumming with a dizzying mix of nerves and exhilaration. She wore a gown of midnight blue, sleek and elegant, a subtle nod to the club's new splendor and the man who had orchestrated it. Her hands, still bearing faint scars from the ropes that had bound her, trembled slightly as she smoothed the fabric. She was no longer just the bankrupt singer. She was the celebrated voice of the sapphire, its heart, its soul. And she was Damon Volkov's. His presence was a quiet hum at the edge of her awareness, even before he entered the small dressing room. He moved with that familiar, silent grace, his dark suit impeccable, his obsidian eyes sweeping over her. He offered no compliments, no effusive praise, just a single, intense look that conveyed absolute ownership and profound satisfaction. "Ready, Alara?" His voice was a low thrum against the rising murmur of the crowd outside. She met his gaze, a dangerous thrill coursing through her. "As I'll ever be." He reached out, his strong, scarred fingers gently adjusting a loose strand of hair from her face. His touch, light yet possessive, sent a familiar shiver down her spine. "They await you." Stepping onto the stage was like stepping into a dream. The renovated Sapphire Lounge was breathtaking, the jewel box come to life. The applause that erupted was a roaring tide, washing over her, enveloping her. She saw Marcus in his usual corner booth, a rare, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. And in his private, elevated booth, Damon Volkov. His gaze, dark and unyielding, locked onto hers, a silent anchor in the sea of faces. She began to play, her fingers dancing across the obsidian keys. Her music, once a melancholic lament, now held a new depth, a raw power forged in the crucible of fear and survival. It was still soulful, still heartfelt, but laced with a dangerous edge, a defiant strength that spoke of shadows. Embraced and battles won. She sang of longing, of rescue, of intoxicating allure of a love found in the darkest of places. Each note was a testament to her transformation, a melody born of fire and devotion. She poured her heart into it for the crowd, for her grandfather's legacy, and for the man whose obsidian eyes never left her. Later that evening, long after the last patron had departed and the echoes of her final encore had faded, Alara found herself alone with Volkov in the silent, magnificent club. He stood by the stage, his gaze sweeping over the empty tables, the lingering scent of celebration in the air. "It is everything you dreamed of," she said, her voice soft in the quiet. He turned, his eyes finding hers. "It is everything we dreamed of. And more." He walked towards her, his presence filling the space, his power a palpable force. He stopped directly in front of her, his height towering, his gaze intense. "Alara," he began, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur that vibrated through her. "Victor Thorne's empire has been utterly dismantled. His name, his influence erased. Intana, his betrayal has been repaid in full. My world is secure. Your world is secure." She knew what that meant. The grim, unyielding finality of it chilled her, even as it settled a profound sense of peace within her. This was his form of justice, his absolute protection. He reached into his inner jacket pocket, pulling out a small, velvet box. Her heart skipped a beat. This wasn't the traditional diamond Alara might have once imagined. Instead, nestled on the black velvet, was a ring crafted from dark, polished obsidian, almost black, but catching the light with faint, almost imperceptible veins of deep sapphire blue. It was beautiful, dangerous, and utterly, perfectly him. This, he said, his voice deep and resonant, is a symbol, not of obligation, but of claim, of belonging, of a vow that is not whispered in fragile moonlight, but forged in shadow and fire. He took her hand, his fingers warm and strong as he slid the obsidian ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, a cool dark weight that felt as natural as her own skin. "You are mine, Alara," he stated, his gaze unwavering, possessive, absolute. "My most treasured possession. My light in the dark. My soul's melody." He paused, then his thumb stroked the cool stone. "And I am yours. My strength, my empire, my very being is all yours. For eternity. In this world. In our world." Alara felt tears prick at her eyes, not of sadness, but of a profound, overwhelming acceptance. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were no white knights, no innocent promises. Their love was a complex, dangerous tapestry woven from shadows and sacrifice, born of desperation and sealed with blood. But it was theirs. It was fiercely, undeniably real. "Damon," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She reached up, her hands cupping his chiseled jaw, her thumbs tracing the faint line of an old scar she now knew the story behind. "I am yours. And you are mine." He leaned down, his lips claiming hers in a deep, possessive kiss that left her breathless, a silent vow passing between them, more binding than any written contract. It was a kiss of triumph, a belonging, of a dark, unbreakable love. They stood there, amidst the opulent silence of the newly reborn Sapphire Lounge, two souls intertwined in a dangerous dance. The future stretched before them, not a path bathed in perpetual sunshine, but a journey through shadows and intermittent light, guarded by his formidable presence. There would be challenges, she knew. New threats, new battles. But they would face them together. The Obsidian King and his Sapphire Songbird. Their love, forged in the crucible of his dark empire, was not perfect, not conventional, but it was resilient. It was a haven fiercely protected, built on understanding and a profound shared acceptance of who they truly were. As the city lights twinkled outside, a silent, glittering testament to the world they commanded, Alara knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her song had found its true harmony. And in the dangerous, protective embrace of Damon Volkov, she had finally found her forever. A forever etched in shadows, but shining with a powerful, undeniable love. Have you ever felt lost, watching your dreams crumble, wondering if anyone would ever truly see your worth beyond her brokenness? Alara's journey reminds us that true strength isn't about avoiding the shadows, but finding your song even when darkness threatens to consume you. And sometimes the most profound healing love isn't soft. It's a fierce, unyielding protection from a heart that claims you completely, seeing your spirit as its most precious treasure. This story whispers that our past wounds don't define our future, and even in the most dangerous worlds, a love strong enough to rewrite your destiny can emerge. If this tale of fierce protection and undeniable belonging resonated with a part of your soul, if it whispered promises of hope in unexpected places, then know you're not alone. Join our community of dreamers and fighters by hitting that like button, subscribing for more stories that defy expectations, and tell us in the comments, what does being claimed by love truly mean to you?